Okay. We will start it now, and because it's Mr. Filippo from will bring this webinar in English, so I will use English to follow it. So yeah, welcome to our webinar. So right now we will talk about direct connect topic. Okay, please next. Yeah. So in this 5 slides, I will tell you about ViBiCloud. What is ViBiCloud? So we are a leading managed cloud service or solution provider. We have started in 2014, and we have a commitment to focus and provide end-to-end solution for our customer to achieve their cloud economics journey. Yeah, we deliver multi-cloud platform, and we have ISO 27001, so we can secure your data from the internal system. And we have a multi-cloud connectivity gateway, so we have a 3 connectivity gateway. They are in IDC 3D, Next Center.
Based out of Singapore. Currently, we still have to work from home, and the person upstairs is doing some renovation. So I'm sorry about it. So I'm Filippo, as I mentioned already, and I am a solutions architect working for Megaport for now almost 3 years. I work across all Asia, so I used to come very, very often to Indonesia before, and I used to work extensively with the ViBiCloud guys. So today we want to explain a little bit about how you can connect to AWS using Direct Connect from the Megaport platform. So cloud has a connection to us, and I was, guys, it's like thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So as I was mentioning, Megaport and ViBiCloud, they have a partnership relation. So I will explain you a little bit more about Megaport, and I will explain you a little bit more about how Megaport can enable AWS Direct Connect. And thanks to the relationship between ViBiCloud, and Megaport, you will be able to get this technology, these type of architectures as well. So let's get started. First of all, Megaport has an extensive experience in delivering AWS Direct Connect connections. We are part of the Megaport of the AWS Partner Network, and as of now, we have over 3,000 connections from the Megaport network into AWS. Those type of connections leverage the AWS product called Direct Connect, and generally speaking are secure layer 2 type of connections. Why did I write layer 3 as well? The reason is that recently, but I would say it's almost 2 years now, it's not that recent anymore, Megaport also offers layer 3 connection into AWS using a product called Megaport Cloud Router. I will explain you more about the product later. Basically, it's a virtual router that is capable of connecting you to AWS and multiple other cloud service providers, and it will be responsible for the layer 2 and the layer 3 portion of the connectivity. We are one of the few partners which is capable of delivering AWS connectivity with the hosted VIF and the hosted connection model. Again, we will give you some details about these different delivery models later on. However, those two are two different ways for partners such as Megaport and ViBi, to connect to AWS Direct Connect. Megaport also offers a flexible billing and pay-as-you-go approach. But what I think is really, really important is that Megaport has a technology called VXC, which is a virtual cross-connect technology, a virtual connection technologies that can be deployed from the NNI, from the network interface, to the cloud service provider interface in a matter of a few minutes. So if you need to connect to AWS, for example, from your network interface in Singapore, ViBi has a network interface with us in Singapore called NNI. If you need to connect to AWS, whether in Singapore or somewhere else, in Hong Kong, in the US, in Europe, you can actually, ViBi can deploy this connection in a matter of a few minutes. Everything is software defined, so it can be controlled through a portal or through APIs. Basically, Megaport is a global network infrastructure that is controlled by a software layer, by an automation platform that is controlled through a website, basically, or APIs. Bandwidth that we allocate, it can be allocated dynamically. That is why we like to say that we are an elastic connectivity company, and we are data center and carrier network service provider agnostic. So we are available over 90 different data center operators. It doesn't mean we are in 90 DCs only, we are in many more. It means that we are in 90 different operators, right? So as you can see, we operate in Equinix, for instance, SG1 and SG2 in Singapore. We are in HKT in Hong Kong, in the Sky Exchange DC, the one in Wan Chai and TKO, One Asia, Digital Realty, both in Hong Kong and in Singapore and in a lot of other locations in Europe, US and Australia, and so on and so forth. So this is really important because no matter where you are, we try to be there so that you can leverage on the Megaport software-defined network fabric, basically. We have an NNI in Singapore with ViBiCloud. NNI is basically a network-to-network interface. And ViBi can connect, allow you to connect and help you to connect to any of these locations with a single virtual cross connect. We like to say that we are an elastic connectivity provider, but we also like to call our service network as a service type of technology. So we are all familiar with, for example, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. We are all very familiar with the concept of opening up a portal, order some compute instances or some storage systems, and just pay, for example, for how much we are running that resource for, or maybe don't have to pay for setup fees, don't have to pay for one-time charges. We are very comfortable with a real-time provisioning of a compute instance. We are very comfortable with decommissioning a compute instances whenever we want. We are very comfortable with creating VPC. These concepts are concepts that we are comfortable with. But when we think about the networking aspect, we never really work with something that works similarly to those cloud resources that I described. So you have, from one side, the cloud service providers that they tell us that everything can be done as a service, everything can be done with a sort of real-time provisioning, with a certain level of flexibility, elasticity, flexible terms from a contractual standpoint. The other side, you have a network that usually is much less flexible. So when you talk with a traditional connectivity provider, all of these real-time provisioning, no setup fees, no one-time charges doesn't really apply. You have very expensive and very long setup costs and setup times. Most likely you are dealing with a fixed capacity or a fixed pipe. You have very, very, very long locked in contracts. So for 2 years, 3 years, for instance, generally speaking, it's quite difficult to make any changes to the service. You need to have multiple calls, multiple emails, a lot of paper contracts. So in this table, we try to compare the connectivity model that Megaport offers with a traditional connectivity model. I will not go through each and every single one of them because you need to remember that most likely you will be connecting to Megaport through ViBiCloud. However, you can look at some of these, and some of these are benefits that ViBiCloud will experience by using Megaport, and some of these benefits can also be applicable to you. Most likely you will not to get all of them because you still have to deal with the ViBi guys, because the ViBi guys are going to help you in setting up the service, in maybe connecting to the cloud, and they will also maybe offer some other added value services. But this is the type of platform guys we are dealing with, and I'm sure ViBi has a very competitive offer for you when you want to connect to AWS from Jakarta, or from any other location in Indonesia, to be fair. In terms of services, and guys, at any point, if you have a question, whether the question is in English or is in Bahasa Indonesia, just write it in the chat whenever you want. We are going to leave probably 10 to 15 minutes at the end to answer those questions or to collect those questions and follow up with you later on. So from a services perspective or a portfolio perspective, Megaport is a very, I would say it's very, very simple. It's a simple company because we want to do one thing only, and we want to do it well. And that one thing is connectivity. Connectivity to DC, DCI, for example, data center interconnection, connectivity to cloud services, so connecting from Singapore to AWS in Singapore or in Hong Kong, and also connectivity to internet exchanges. So we don't really sell a lot of different services. We like to keep ourselves quite simple. We only offer 5 services as of today. Probably the most important, especially in the past, used to be called Megaport. It is still called Megaport, to be fair. So the product has the same name of the company, so excuse for the confusion. A Megaport is basically your entry point into the Megaport network. In this case, we are working with ViBi, is the ViBi entry point to the Megaport network. Is a network-to-network interface, so it's a network interface that connects the ViBi network to the Megaport network, and is actually an high-speed Ethernet interface that basically comes in 2 different flavors, 1 gig or 10 gig. As simple as it gets. It's basically a network interface. But a network interface by itself doesn't really do anything. So imagine you have 2 network devices. In those network devices, you have multiple interfaces, but if you put them on a table, they don't really do anything. You need to, assuming they have power and everything, you need to connect them most likely with a cable to keep it very simple. The same happens with the Megaport service. You have a Megaport, but until we deploy the connectivity services, our virtual cross connect, that interface by itself doesn't really do anything. those virtual cross connect, those VXC, they are basically point-to-point Ethernet connections, layer 2 connections between your Megaport or the VB Megaport and another endpoint connected to the Megaport network. Another endpoint can be a DC, can be a Megaport Cloud Router, can be an IX, an Internet Exchange, or most likely is going to be a cloud port, an AWS Cloud on-ramp location, for example. So if you are connecting your network interface to AWS, for example, in Singapore, there are multiple on-ramp locations, and you will use a cloud VXC to connect your port to the cloud. If instead, not only you want to connect to AWS, but you also want to connect from Singapore to, I don't know, another data centers where you have some workload running, which is maybe in Japan or maybe is in Hong Kong, you will use a transport VXC. But we are talking about the same technology. So virtual point-to-point Ethernet connection from your port to another endpoints. Those VXC, they are very flexible when it comes about bandwidth, and they can also be provisioned very, very quickly using our software platform. Last but not least, we have other two services. We own and operate internet exchanges around the globe. So for instance, I live in Singapore. There is a Mega IX in Singapore, but there are Mega IX instances in a lot of other locations. We will be able to give you a list of the locations later, or my colleagues who are in the chat, they can maybe share those links with you. And we have the layer 3 product, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the MCR, which is basically a virtualized router that can really simplify your connectivity architecture and help you connect in a very quick and efficient way to cloud service providers, software as a service providers, and other service providers. I have created a few slides that I will present to you later about the MCR, because actually one very, very strong point of the MCR is the possibility of connecting different cloud service providers together. So maybe you are looking at migrating some data from another cloud into AWS. You can use the MCR for that. Or maybe most likely you want to connect your AWS instances to a backend that is hosted somewhere else. You can use the MCR for that as well. We will see a few use cases later. In terms of cloud enablement, once you are cross-connected with us, you have access to 14 AWS global regions. This is direct connectivity, and it is irregardless from your Megaport location. So VB has a Megaport in Singapore. They can connect to any of those locations with just a VXC. For you, most likely is important to know where in Asia we can connect you to: Sydney, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Tokyo. On the right-hand side, there is a few details more about our global on-ramps backbone, I would say, presence. We have almost 160 different on-ramps with 93 from other service providers that allow you to connect to 87 different cloud regions. So not only Megaport can help you with connecting to AWS, it is actually a connectivity company that has cloud connectivity at its core. So we can connect you to a lot of different workloads. I will spend maybe just 10 or 15 seconds on this map. it's not important for you to remember everything by heart, because anyway, the session is being recorded and you will be able to see these at your desk whenever you need it. However, these are all the Megaport enable Direct Connect global locations. As you can see, in Asia, we have plenty of them between Hong Kong, Singapore, and Australia. We have a lot of others in Europe, a lot of others in the US. As I mentioned multiple times already, don't worry. From Singapore, you have access to any of them in case you are running workload somewhere in Europe or somewhere in the US, for example. I will explain you the difference between hosted connection and hosted VIF in a while. So don't worry when you read hosted connect and you don't really understand what does it mean. No worries about it. From a delivery standpoint, I already mentioned to you a couple of very important things. So I mentioned to you what a Megaport is. I mentioned to you from a Megaport how you can connect to different AWS region, for example, different services. It could be other CSP, other service providers, IX, it can be another port. And I explained to you that to do those connections, you need to deploy VXC. This slide brings a little bit everything together. So very, very important, you can see that from a single interface, you can actually have multiple connections. So one single interface can be sliced up into multiple connections. So you can, for example, connect to different AWS region and maybe to different DCs where your workload is running. So we are very, very flexible with that so that you can get the most out of the interface that you buy. So this is actually how deployment looks like. It is very simplified, but it is actually not too far from the reality, because this is how it looks, and what is missing actually is just a BGP session between the layer 3 device and the cloud, and basically that's it. So it's very simplified, but it is actually the way it looks in real life as well. So you can have a look at that, but then we will drill down into a bit of lower level details when it comes about connecting to AWS. So I told you before that we are one of the few partners which is capable of connecting to AWS, allowing you to connect to AWS using two different methods: the hosted connection and the hosted VIF. If you guys are familiar with this terminology, that's perfect. If you're not familiar, don't worry. This table explains quite extensively the difference. So a little bit of history. So a partner such as Megaport has different ways to allow their customers to connect to AWS. Some partners historically only did hosted VIF. Some partners only did hosted connections. Megaport, for example, in the past only supported the hosted VIF model. There are differences in these two models, and we will explain them in a few seconds. But right now, Megaport is one of the few which is able to offer both models on its platform. Why did we decide to host both models? Because each model has certain advantages, and in some cases might have disadvantages as well. And depending on the workload, and depending to what do you want to connect to, one model can be a little bit more appropriate than the other one. So Right now, we hear a lot of companies who wants to connect to the transit gateway, for example. They want to use a transit VIF, a transit virtual interface, to connect to the transit gateway. They can do it using an hosted connection model. As you can see here, I have my mouse on there. But they can't do that with the hosted VIF model. So this is, for example, one difference. There are companies who maybe need the VXC, the virtual connection, to terminate on different devices. This is something that is supported on the hosted connection, but not on the hosted VIF. And we hear a lot of companies, for example, who really want dedicated bandwidth into AWS. We can offer dedicated bandwidth with the hosted connection, while we offer a bandwidth on a port that can be oversubscribed on the hosted VIF. But so why would company wants to use an hosted VIF? Maybe they have a workload that requires frequent speed changes. Maybe you have a workload that 2 or 3 times a week require 5 gig, and for all the other times of the week requires 50 meg, for example. Speed changes are not allowed on the hosted connection, but they are allowed on the hosted VIF. So the models do something very similar. They do the same. They allow you to connect to AWS using Direct Connect. But depending on your application, depending on your workload, depending on what do you want to connect to, one model can fit your requirement maybe better than the other one. You can engage in your design discussions, a ViBiCloud team that can also engage us as well, so we can recommend you on which option is the best. So to recap, the hosted connection can offer you dedicated bandwidth, one-to-one contention ratio. However, it offers this bandwidth with set VXC speed, so 50, 100, 200, with no chances to do speed changes unless you decide to cancel your VXC and redeploy a new one. We offer you diversity in terms of devices on the same on-ramp location. So if you connect to Equinix, for example, we will have different devices with different set of cross connects in different connectivity zone. We call them orange zone and blue zone, but they are just diversity zone. You need to pay AWS for the virtual interface bandwidth, and you have support for the transit VIF. The hosted VIF instead is being offered on a port that may be oversubscribed, and Megaport is trying its best with capacity management to avoid any type of problems, any type of congestion. However, remember that on the same port there are multiple VIF, and that port can be oversubscribed. However, it comes with a very, very flexible speed changes mechanism. You can start with 1 meg, increase to 5 gig, decrease to 2 meg, increase again to 5 gig, decrease to 10 meg, whenever you want, and as many times as you want. However, in comparison to the previous model, the hosted connection, this does not manage the diversity. You can still connect to multiple on-ramp, different on-ramps, but the way we are building the connectivity edge on the on-ramp is different. There is an advantage, though, not only about the speed changes, but also from the fact that the hosted VIF for the customer is generally a little bit cheaper, because Megaport is paying for the AWS port charge or the VIF bandwidth. We will see that later. So there are certain advantages in terms of cost and in terms of speed and flexibility, I would say, but there are some drawbacks, such as the oversubscription of the port and the fact that the hosted VIF does not support transit VIF. So if you want to connect to a transit gateway using a hosted VIF model, you need to use a public VIF and connect via VPN. So it's a complete different approach. Now, let's drill down on something slightly more low level than the Megaport diagram that I shared to you before, but this should be quite simple. So this is how we connect in a hosted VIF scenario. So there is in the DC a cross connect between network device and Megaport using single mode fiber. This has been already done by ViBi. So ViBi is already cross connected to us. And when we order hosted VIF, we can actually connect to public services using a public VIF and private services using a private VIF. So what do we connect to? What is the difference? What is a public service and a private service? So if you use a private VIF, you actually can connect to VPCs basically using RFC 1918 IPs, so private IPs. So if you want to connect to your VPC, a private VIF is the type of VIF you most likely want to use, unless you're talking about a lot of different VPCs, and this is another use case. A public VIF is the same type of technology, but allows you to connect to public facing services, all of those services in Amazon Web Service that are reachable through public IPs. And example of those services are, for example, Amazon S3. So if you hear object storage, buckets, this is the type of storage we are talking about. Or another example is Redshift. So there are some requirements and differences between the two, mainly in the way you need to set up, for example, BGP. For a public VIF, you will need public IP space and so on and so forth. But we are talking about a similar technologies, virtual interface. The main difference is that one allows you to connect to VPC and the other one allows you to connect to public facing services. So in a hosted VIF, everything you need to do is deploy VXC, and this VXC maps to a VIF, private or public, and that's it. You want to change the speed, you can. You want to connect to maybe another VPC, you just use another private VIF. You want to change the speed, as I said, you can. You want to cancel the VXC, you just do it whenever you want. You only pay Megaport. You don't have to pay Amazon for the port hour cost. You pay Megaport, and of course you pay Amazon for the services that are running in the cloud and the AWS charges, but nothing else to pay. The hosted connection offers a bit more connectivity options. We still support the private VIF to a virtual gateway, so to a single VPC, or to Direct Connect gateway. A Direct Connect gateway is a component, is a gateway that can associate up to 10 VPCs, so you can, using a single virtual interface, to connect to multiple VPCs. But it also supports the transit VIF, the transit virtual interface. The transit virtual interface is used to connect to the transit gateway. So if you are interested in using the transit gateway because you have an architecture which is made of a lot of different VPCs, and those VPCs, they have to talk to each other, the transit gateway is what you want to use. It still supports the public VIF. And the main differences here are, as you can see, you can connect to two different routers, an orange one and a blue one. This is just for diversities, for diversity option. And you have to pay not only Megaport, but also AWS for the port hour. So every hour you're running a hosted VIF connection, you have to pay. Unhosted connection, you have to pay. One thing to remember that I didn't mention, the transit virtual interface is only available for connection with a capacity of 1 gig or above. And just to speak about the diversity and the redundancy, this is how a scenario looks like with AWS hosted connection and Megaport when you want to connect to the transit gateway with redundancy on the on-ramp side. So you will have two VXC, one connecting to the orange zone, one connecting to the blue zone. That's basically what I wanted to show with this diagram. There are a few use cases why people might want to basically use Megaport or use direct connectivity to then connect to AWS. Some of these might apply to you, some might not. However, we really see a strong value proposition when it comes about data center migration, creation of basically management of hybrid clouds, or creating an architecture which is made of either private cloud, public cloud, on-premise devices, for example, and of course, to dynamically manage the bandwidth for certain workloads such as migration and backups. Megaport has a strong experience with AWS. We have been working with them extensively, probably in the past 6 years. So we have a tight API integration with the AWS console in the backend. We offer you a lot of different direct connect capabilities because we are able to use the hosted VIF and the hosted connection model. So connection from 1 to 10 gig, speed changes, a lot of VXC to separate traffics, scalability, and so on and so forth. And with the hosted connection, but as well as the hosted VIF, we can offer in different ways redundancy and diversity and real-time provisioning of those connections. Now, we have about maybe 5 to 10 minutes before we will leave it to questions. I have a few slides more about the Megaport Cloud Router, and then my portion is concluded. So the last probably 3 slides. So the Megaport Cloud Router is basically a virtual router which allows connectivity between different service providers. So we see this product as very, very strong when it comes about cloud-to-cloud routing. Because cloud-to-cloud routing, generally speaking, in a traditional setup, it is done with customer managing the connection to each cloud from their router. But what happens if their router is geographically very, very far from the cloud regions they're using? Or what happens if they want to install a router as close as possible to the service provider region? They would probably need to call a DC company, get a rack, get some rack space, install the device in there. It becomes very costly. There is definitely contract period to consider. The setup is low. Even if you want to get somebody who does some managed services, might cost a lot as well. So it might not be a very flexible and quick way to connect to the cloud. So what we have thought? We have thought, like, we have a lot of different DCs, and those DCs, they have a lot of connections to the cloud. Why cannot we offer to customers a virtual machine, a virtual router that you can spin up anywhere you want, and you can basically connect this router to all the service providers that you need and use this router to route traffic between one another. So for instance, if you're using AWS in Hong Kong and maybe another service provider in Hong Kong, why would you route the traffic in Singapore? Why would you even route the traffic from Indonesia? You can just deploy a Megaport Cloud Router in Hong Kong and route the traffic between the different regions, the different service provider using this virtual component. So really, this one is just a virtual machine, is a virtual router that can allow you to connect to different clouds, different CSPs, different service providers in a very, very simple fashion. It takes 1 to 2 minutes to deploy the router, 1 to 2 minutes to deploy each cloud connection, and that's pretty much it. We are, as I said, tightly integrated with AWS, so the layer 3 portion of the configuration, a lot of details are automatically configured. So you don't really need to be a networking expert to create complicated architecture that are made of different VPCs belonging to different clouds, for instance. We have noticed that a lot of customers are using these really not for migration purposes, not only for migration purposes, but very often clouds are using, customers are using maybe AWS, and maybe they have some backends on other clouds, or they might use application on other clouds. So they want to use the MCR because they want these different environments to live together, to talk to each other. So we have seen, for example, with customer using Oracle DBs, or with customer using HEC, which is basically HANA Enterprise Cloud, and they want to connect it to AWS. The MCR has a lot of other advantages as well. It can be as big as 10 gig in terms of capacity. There are different speed options. So if you don't need 10 gig, you can have a smaller MCR instance. Is contracted by the hour, and you can actually use it for as long as you need. And if you don't need it anymore because maybe your migration is over, or you have decided to decommission one of the applications that they were talking to, you can just decommission the MCR and delete it, and that's it. So it's very, very flexible, very useful to avoid traffic from running. And again, you can use it also to manage multiple cloud BGP sessions. And remember that due to our integration with AWS, for example, some of those layer 3 configuration, BGP configuration, is pretty much automatically managed by Megaport itself. So here we have quite a few additional resources about Megaport, Megaport with Direct Connect, about our portal, about our APIs. You don't need to remember all of those by heart. These will be given to you later, and my colleagues can share some of them in the chat. However, I would recommend you, if you have a bit of time, to spend 5 or 10 minutes looking at those videos, looking at those resources, because they are really, really useful, and they will help you understand better about Megaport, but mainly about Direct Connect. Once you are familiar with that, if you have any requirement, feel free to involve us directly, or feel free to talk with ViBiCloud. If you need our assistance, we will be able to help. So here there is a case study that I think guys from Vibi wanted to present, right?
Okay, thank you, Filippo. Maybe before we go to our use case, maybe we can answer for the first question. Filippo, is it okay? From Mr. Dennis, from Mr. Dennis Stevanus. What is different between Direct Connect and site-to-site VPN connection? Can you please to answer it, Filippo? Thank you.
Yes. So Direct Connect is a different product than the VPN itself. So when it comes about Direct Connect, we are basically talking about a direct connection, literally with a fiber, between Megaport and the AWS network itself. So we are directly connected to them. There is no need to create an IPsec tunnel or to use internet at all, because we have a direct connection between the Megaport network and the AWS backbone. What happens with the VPN? So when we're talking about Amazon VPN, for example, what the customer is doing, generally speaking, but this happens with VPNs generally, they are building an IPsec tunnel, for example, on top of the internet itself to encrypt traffic, to get maybe access into a VPC or into whatever other resources they want to connect to. So Direct Connect is not based on building something on top of the internet, but is about connecting the two networks directly, basically really with fiber. We are cross-connected directly to AWS. Now, if a customer has the requirement to use a VPN and he says, okay, I understand Direct Connect, but I really need or I really want to use VPN, you can use VPN over Direct Connect as well. So there are ways to do it, usually using a public VIF, and you can set up IPsec VPN over a Direct Connect public VIF. If there is interest in creating this type of architecture, feel free to contact us later and we can provide you a documentation around that. But remember, Direct Connect is different from a VPN, doesn't make any use of the internet itself, is a direct relationship between us and AWS because there is a cross connect done between our network and the AWS edge, let's call it that way.
Alright, thank you Filippo for your answer. Semoga bisa membantu menjawab ya Pak Denny. Oke, sebelum kita lanjutkan pertanyaan yang kedua, silakan Bapak Ibu bisa mengisi feedback form. Linknya sudah kita berikan melalui kolom di chat. Ya, karena kita akan berikan hadiah bagi mereka yang mengisi feedback form. Oke, nanti hadiahnya apa di akhir ya, kita akan kasih tahu. So, selanjutnya kita akan lanjut. So, we will continue to use case. Filippo, can you share the screen again?
Yeah. 1 second, because I see there is another question from Andri Arizandi, which basically says, basically Andri is asking what happens if the router or the switch doesn't support Q&Q, but I have to connect to a CSP. What needs to be done? So AWS does not require Q&Q when it comes about Direct Connect. They only require you to basically define a .1Q VLAN. So it's a single tag VLAN. So there is no need for Q&Q to be defined. However, I understand that this question might most likely be related from how you are going to connect from Indonesia into AWS Direct Connect. So most likely, if you want to know how to manage maybe Q&Q from the last mile side into AWS, then you will have to involve ViBi. But remember that from a purely Megaport to AWS standpoint, Q&Q is not needed. AWS, I think, specifically never really mentioned about supporting Q&Q, only about supporting .1Q. So you need to make sure together with ViBi that anything you send to AWS will be single tag only and not double tagged. Then deal with ViBi if you have Q&Q requirement from Indonesia, but make sure that whatever is hand off to AWS is single tag only. And that was the answer. I hope it helped. I will share the screen again because I couldn't see the question. So this was the case study, Artanto. Please, sorry.
Thank you, Filippo. Semoga juga bisa membantu menjawab Pak Andri Arisandi. Oke, kita akan beralih ke use case, salah satu use case dari ViBiCloud yang akan dibawakan oleh Bu Emma dari Business Solution Team kita. Bu Emma?
Halo.
Hai, silakan Bu Emma. Ya,
Okay.
sudah kedengaran.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. I'm sorry, Megaport team, I will deliver the case study in bahasa.
It's okay.
Okay, jadi pertama-tama saya Emma dari tim Business Solution, bukan tim technical, bukan engineer juga. Kali ini diminta sama Pak Hartanto dari tim marketing untuk sharing case Direct Connect solution apa sih yang pernah kita dari tim ViBi ini deliver ke customer kita. Actually ada beberapa use cases yang mirip-mirip sih, jadi aku ambil 3 contoh aja untuk di-sharingin kali ini. Yang number one ini startup company, unicorn, ya ada di layar ya bisa kita lihat. Dia itu punya main workload on AWS Cloud sebetulnya. Nah, ketika mereka mau deploy, mereka punya payment solution, payment feature, itu mereka butuh taruh workload mereka di Indonesia. That's why they engage with us gitu waktu itu. So kita bangunin private cloud untuk customer ini, dan the Direct Connect solution come in ketika mereka butuh communication yang lancar dan cepat dari mereka punya private cloud di Indonesia dengan AWS mereka yang sudah running gitu, yang hampir mostly all production workload itu di AWS. So we built the direct connection karena bisa menjamin latensi dan stability dari connection itu sendiri, seperti tadi yang sudah sempat dijelasin sama Filippo juga. Berbeda dengan VPN connection yang masih lay over the internet, kalau direct connect ini betul-betul private connection, jadi cross connect langsung ke si AWS. Another case yang pernah kita ketemu juga di startup company, big startup company, mereka itu using multi-cloud environment currently, dan they want the cloud yang di Singapura itu untuk talk directly to each other gitu, tanpa perlu turun ke on-premises. Nah, di sini juga kita bisa bring Direct Connect as the solution gitu, sehingga latensinya benar-benar bisa diminimize under 2 digit karena mereka sama-sama di Singapura gitu. And we can deliver that kind of solution juga. Dan for this startup company, mereka juga using analytics on cloud, tapi datanya mereka ditaruh semua di on-prem. Jadi di situ juga dibutuhkan tentunya speed yang kencang sama connection yang stable. Sehingga Direct Connect kita juga sambungin dari on-premises mereka yang taruh datanya itu dengan cloud, di mana mereka pakai data analytics services gitu di atas. Dan yang terakhir juga cases yang kita punya itu bahkan untuk banking company. Di sini ada enterprise company yang all the development itu udah di running on cloud, tapi mereka punya production itu semua masih di on premises. Jadi they also consider, udah sih akhirnya udah di deploy juga direct connection-nya. Karena kalau dalam case financial industry bukan cuma stability sama speed yang dicari, tapi juga security-nya. Karena kita bisa bilang direct connection is way more secure than any other connection, karena betul-betul private tunnel sendiri terpisah. Itu sih several cases yang mungkin bisa di-sharingkan dan bisa jadi tambahan juga buat informasi buat Bapak Ibu yang mungkin saat ini sedang considering apakah direct connection ini bisa jadi jawaban, bisa jadi solusi buat case di tempat Bapak Ibu masing-masing. Mungkin selanjutnya aku kembalikan sesi berikutnya ke Pak Hartanto ya.
Alright, so thank you Bu Emma untuk use case-nya. Jadi ada 3 ya use case yang diceritakan secara singkat, dengan intinya menggunakan Direct Connect itu bisa membantu meningkatkan stabilitas juga untuk produktivitas dari sisi bisnis Bapak Ibu sekalian. So bila nanti dari Bapak Ibu ingin diskusi lebih lanjut juga mengenai Direct Connect yang mungkin bisa membantu dari sisi company, feel free untuk diisi feedback formnya. Dan ya, we have a special gift juga untuk Bapak Ibu yang telah mengisi feedback form. Can you please next slide, Filippo? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, great. Bapak Ibu, untuk yang mengisi feedback form dan juga yang telah meregistrasikan dirinya sebelum di acara ini berlangsung, akan mendapatkan special gift yaitu Get OVO Case sebesar 50K. Kita akan transfer langsung melalui mobile phone yang sudah Bapak Ibu berikan di feedback form. Dan juga kita akan pastikan bahwa data yang diberikan Bapak Ibu pada saat registrasi dan juga ketika mengisi feedback form itu sama. Baik Bapak Ibu. Jadi Bapak Ibu yang mengisi link registration and feedback form can get this special gift from us. Karena kita juga menghargai juga waktu yang telah diberikan Bapak Ibu kepada kami, dan ya kita punya 3 menit lagi. Mungkin dari Bapak Ibu masih ada pertanyaan, feel free untuk diketik. Apakah ada Bapak Ibu? Oke, sembari menunggu pertanyaan yang mungkin sisa satu pertanyaan lagi kali ya. Yang ingin bertanya Bapak Ibu boleh. Dan sembari paralel juga untuk feedback form, terima kasih yang sudah mengisi feedback formnya. Sudah ada sekitar setengah nih yang mengisi. Terima kasih. Kita akan sync up juga dengan data pada saat registration dan kita akan kirimkan special gift-nya berupa OVO case ke nomor handphone yang telah Bapak Ibu isi di feedback form. Pastikan nomor handphone itu sudah terdaftar di OVO application ya Bapak Ibu. Baik, sepertinya sudah tidak ada lagi pertanyaan. Oke, for Filippo, do you have any last information?
No, I just want to thanks first of all to everyone for participating today, because I didn't have time to do it before because I had to share the screen again and reply to the questions. I wanted to thanks everyone, and as I mentioned before, if you have any question, if you have any requirement, feel free to involve the ViBiCloud people because they have a very good relationship with us, and we will be able to help you from the very beginning of your requirement. And you can also ask questions and work with them using your native language, which is Bahasa. They have access to us via WhatsApp, via email. We used to meet very often in Jakarta. So don't worry, just ask them whatever you might need and we will be able to help. They will be able to funnel any feedback to us. Thanks a lot. Please do the feedback because it would be good to see what do you think about the session. And thank you very much to everyone. That's it. Thank you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Filippo and Megaport team for your time. And thank you, terima kasih untuk Bapak Ibu semua yang telah bersedia meluangkan waktunya. Terima kasih juga yang telah mengisi feedback form. Sampai jumpa di ViBiWebinar selanjutnya. Terima kasih dan selamat pagi semuanya.